Welcome to part one of this three-part Sparks 1524 look at the National Naval Aviation Museum on board Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. I'm Nathaniel Miller, coming to you from naturally neighborly Niceville, Florida via a live recording. Naval aviation first came to Pensacola in 1914. To this day, the base remains the hub for training naval aviators, maintenance personnel, and aircrew. It's only natural that one of the world's premier aviation museums would grow out of the fertile, sandy soil of the air station. Opening its doors to the public for the first time in 1963, the museum's first acquisition was an example of the 1956 Goodyear inflatoplane. Yes, you heard me right, an inflatable airplane. The Goodyear inflatoplane was a concept developed to try and rescue downed airmen behind enemy lines. The idea was that the inflatoplane would be deflated, packed up, and dropped to the airmen. They could then inflate it and fly to safety. The idea never really took off. The inflatoplane was never bought, and a few examples are in museums to this day. The Aviation Museum in Pensacola has never actually publicly exhibited its inflatoplane because shortly after it acquired that example, it got other aircraft such as a Bearcat, Phantom, and items that were a little more suited to public display. This deflated any idea the inflatoplane had of being part of the display, and the aircraft remains stored in the museum's archives. Also, the inflatoplane the museum got was marked U.S. Army. Just saying. Approaching the museum today, visitors encounter a spectacular facade featuring an F-14 Tomcat rocketing skyward from its pedestal, and an entry hall featuring the larger-than-life statue Spirit of Naval Aviation. This statue showcases aviators from 1914 through 1990 swapping stories about aerial adventures. I've been visiting the museum since I was a freshman in high school in 1987, and I have seen it grown exponentially. Ironically, for a man who ended up as a career military photographer, the first photo I shot in the museum wasn't until 1992, and I photographed the entryway from what was then the main entrance. Today, the museum has grown considerably, with a new entryway beckoning visitors to the exhibits, and the original entryway now the QB Bar Cafe, a full-service cafe featuring the plaques, tables, fittings, and other artifacts from what was once the Officers Club at Naval Air Station QB Point in the Philippines. 1992 saw not only the establishment of the QB Bar Cafe, but two significant additions to the original building. The Blue Angels Atrium was opened, a ceremonial center used for special events featuring 4 A-4 Skyhawks painted in the colors of the Navy Blue Angels hanging from the ceiling. 3 of these Skyhawks actually flew with the Blues, and all 4 aircraft are veterans of combat operations in Vietnam. The aircraft are spaced as closely in formation as they flew in real life. The other major addition in 1992 was the World War II atrium featuring a life-size mock-up of the island from the light carrier USS Cabot, CVL-28. The model of her island surmounts a simulated flight deck featuring numerous World War II aircraft. The museum's unique Sunken Treasures exhibit takes you to the bottom of Lake Michigan, where the museum actually has recovered many of the aircraft on display. Many of these warbirds, their useful combat life ended due to wear and tear on the fuselage, were transferred to training duties over Lake Michigan. Due to the expected mishaps, many were ditched, and the cold, dark, fresh waters of the lake preserved them in remarkably good condition. The Naval Aviation Museum will enthrall you with everything from flying boats as big as modern airliners to exhibits on famous ships such as the World War II carrier USS Enterprise. You'll see space-aged artifacts such as a replica moonlander and one of the actual command modules used during NASA's Skylab missions of the 1970s. Welcome to part 2 of this 3-part look at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. For Sparks 1524, I'm Nathaniel Miller, coming to you in a live recorded event from coastal, casual, and comfortably cosmopolitan Niceville, Florida. Naval aviation first came to Pensacola in 1914 and has remained ever since. The Naval Aviation Museum first opened its doors in 1963. Today, the facility has over 300,000 feet of floor space and occupies a 37-acre campus. It's one of the largest aviation museums in the world and has just too many exhibits and aircraft to discuss in one short video, so I want to highlight just a few of my favorites to give you an idea of the scope of what this facility has to offer. Charles Lindbergh is rightly lauded for his famously successful solo and non-stop flight across the Atlantic in 1927. However, the first flight across the Atlantic had been completed by naval aviators 8 years earlier in 1919 in the giant NC-4 flying boat. The NC flying boats were anti-submarine aircraft that arrived too late for World War I. Instead, NC-1, 3, and 4 were designated to be a three-plane flotilla flying the Atlantic in stages. NC-1 and 3 were both damaged during the attempt and failed to complete the crossing, but the NC-4 made it. Today, the enormous NC-4 towers over the aircraft around it, a giant even by today's standards, and the first aerial link between the old and new worlds. An interesting historical note involving the NC-4 kinda shows just how fast human flight developed during the 20th century. The NC-4 made the first successful crossing of the Atlantic Ocean in 1919. The Apollo 11 spacecraft made the first successful moon landing only 50 years later in 1969. That's a pretty remarkable set of achievements for only half a century. The World War II exhibit is dominated by a full-scale replica of the light carrier USS Cabot's Island and flight deck. Sitting on that flight deck is the only known surviving aircraft that fought at the Battle of Midway. This unique aircraft is a Douglas SBD-2 Dauntless dive bomber. This Dauntless is not only a veteran of Midway, but she was on Ford Island's tarmac when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Following its survival at Pearl Harbor, the Dauntless flew in raids against the Japanese at New Guinea off the carrier USS Lexington before being assigned to a Marine Corps unit on Midway Island. The aircraft participated in the battle on June 4, 1942. The Dauntless ended her military career, like so many other planes in the museum, at the bottom of Lake Michigan. The beat-up aircraft was transferred to training duty over Lake Michigan in 1943 and was ditched in a mishap, sinking out of sight and memory for over 50 years. One exhibit upstairs in the museum's main exhibition hall takes you through historic Palafox Street in Pensacola, to a Ford Pacific Marine Corps Air Base, to an aircraft carrier hangar deck. These are only a few examples of what the museum has to offer. You could write an entire book on this place and you'd still fail to catalog all of the heritage protected under the museum's sun-soaked roof. I hope you've enjoyed this brief tour of just a few of the museum's points of interest. These are some of my favorites, and I thought they would give a good idea of what this place has to offer. Part 3 will take a look at one specific aircraft, an F-14 Tomcat. This particular F-14 Tomcat happens to be one that I actually worked on and launched off the flight deck of USS Carl Vinson many years ago. Welcome to Part 3 of this visit to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. For Sparks 1524 and reporting to you from a vacation destination that's first in the nation, I'm Nathaniel Miller in Niceville, Florida. Founded in 1962 and opening its doors to the public in 1963, the National Naval Aviation Museum has grown into one of the largest aviation museums in the world. It displays such aircraft as the NC-4, first aircraft to actually fly the Atlantic Ocean, and an SBD-2 Dauntless dive bomber, which is the only known aircraft to have actually fought in the Battle of Midway. I grew up going to this museum since I was a freshman in high school. My love of the Navy, of naval aviation, and of adventure in general was fired up and bolstered by the stories and artifacts held under its hallowed roof. You can imagine my surprise when, in the year 2007, I discovered one of the aircraft I had worked on in the Navy myself was now on display. This is an F-14 Tomcat, and actually the last F-14 Tomcat to fly a combat mission. Now before I go on, you need to understand that naval aircraft have two numbers that are used to designate them. The first is called a bureau number, or BUNO, and this is like the VIN number on your car. The VIN number on your car tracks that car through its entire lifetime, no matter what license plate it has and no matter who owns it. The bureau number, or BUNO, tracks a naval aircraft through its lifetime. The nose number on an aircraft is assigned by the squadron and is based on what air wing that squadron is in. So an aircraft's nose number will change as it goes from squadron to squadron, but its BUNO never changes, and that's how I identified this aircraft. When I reported to the world-famous Fighting Black Lions of VF-213 in the year 2000, in August specifically, I was a photographer's mate second class. Now, I didn't report there to be a photojournalist or documentary photographer. At that time, there were 2,000 photomates in the Navy. 40 of us were TARPS photographers. That's the Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System. It's a 17-foot-long pod that carried 3 reconnaissance cameras and was mounted to the underside of the F-14 between the engines. We were also assigned the Lantern Pod, a smaller 6-foot-long pod that mounted under the right wing, provided the laser that put munitions on target, and filmed infrared video. These photos show myself in the foreground and some of my shipmates from the VF-213 TARP shop mounting a TARPS pod under one of our F-14s, and a Lantern pod underneath another one of our Tomcats aboard USS Carl Vinson. The final photo shows me inspecting one of the TARP's cameras prior to a launch sequence beginning in the year 2001. This was the world of the TARP's photographer's mates. All the photographs of this aircraft you're going to see I took with a small camera I kept hidden in my tool pouch. Whenever I could pull it out and take a few photos, I did, but my primary job was being an aircraft maintainer. The Tomcat this story centers on is F-14D Bureau number 161159. Back when I was in VF-213, she carried the nose number 111, 111, or Triple Sticks as we called her. I shot this image of Triple Sticks in our hangar at NAS Oceana after we'd returned from Operation Enduring Freedom, and you can see the respectable scoreboard she'd earned displayed on her fuselage. Shown here in some of the photos I took of her back in September of 2000 while we were deployed to Naval Air Station Fallon, Nevada, Triple Sticks was actually one of the first aircraft I interacted with after reporting to VF-213. VF-213 deployed with Carrier Air Wing 11 aboard USS Carl Vinson in July of 2001. Early in the deployment, my shop gathered for a group photo as the ship's photographer's mates began compiling images for the deployment's cruise book. Later, on a certain September morning, one of my shipmates caught me striking a pose as we began to spin up the aircraft for the day's routine flights. Not long after this photo was taken, I was directed to go aloft in a C-2 Greyhound cargo plane with some of the ship's photomates to get pictures of the air wing in the air. I was specifically tasked with shooting VF-213's Tomcats, and these are the images I got. Triple Sticks didn't fly that day, and, unfortunately, the ship's film processor scratched the film. Still, it was a good day until we trapped back aboard Carl Vinson and learned of the horrific events playing out that terrible September 11th, 2001. VF-213 launched the first manned Navy strikes of Operation Enduring Freedom the night of October 7th, 2001. Triple Sticks, BUNO 161159, was armed up as one of the backup birds in case one of the main strike birds broke down. She's somewhere in these images I shot that evening with a digital camera as we got our strike birds off to the catapult for launch. Triple Sticks flew her first mission the next evening. Over the next couple of months, I occasionally had a moment and was able to get photos of our aircraft on the flight deck, but I only have a couple of images that I can positively identify as Triple Sticks. Interestingly enough, the photo I consider my all-time favorite shot of an F-14 that I ever took was of Triple Sticks against the sunset. Our deployment ended in January of 2002. VF-213 returned to our home port of NAS Oceana in Virginia Beach, Virginia. The next several months were spent in routine maintenance and operations. We did a short deployment to NAS Key West so our aircrew could practice their skills using the aerial gunnery range. We also took Triple Sticks to the Oceana Hush House, a sound-dampening hangar in which we could run her up to full afterburner for maintenance checks. In the summer of 2002, I left VF-213 and was transferred to the photo lab on the island of Guam. The F-14s flew their final combat mission and were retired in 2006. By 2007, I was home on leave when Pop and I took that special tour of the Aviation Museum to see the final combat Tomcat, which was now in their collection, and lo and behold, I discovered that final combat Tomcat was aircraft 161159, or back in my day at VF-213, nose number 111, Triple Sticks. Today, F-14D Tomcat BUNO 161159 bears the nose number 204. That's the last nose number she had on active duty, and it's the one she'll carry into posterity. However, to me, she's always going to be Triple Sticks, one of the first aircraft I interacted with as I learned how to earn my own tool pouch. When I visit my old friend, for that's what she is to me, I will always stand underneath her and for just a moment touch her fuselage, because doing so always brings back memories, both good and bad. Sadly, two of the shipmates I had in my shop at that time are no longer with us. But when I visit her and I touch her fuselage, I can still see them standing on the flight deck in their green gear, waiting to launch another jet, or all of us hanging out together, belly aching about the heat and the long hours, waiting for that next mission to come back so we could do it all over again. That's the joy of visiting a military museum. You never know who you're going to run into. That docent over there, that tour guide you're listening to here, that person standing right next to you. They may be somebody who worked on similar systems as to what you're looking at, or, like me, they may be somebody who actually worked on that very bird, that very aircraft or weapon or car or whatever that's in front of you. But if you find a veteran who knows something about that system, if not that very item you're looking at, let them tell you about it. Let them help that story come alive. It'll make the past more meaningful, it'll let you understand the story and appreciate it better, and you might even find yourself appreciating your own place in the story. If you care to visit the Naval Aviation Museum, I've included their website below. Please check them out. They have a lot to do and a lot more to offer. If you care to read about part 3 of my adventures, I've also linked my column in the description below. I thank you for your time. I hope that maybe today is the day I earned your subscription. Sparks 1524 is more than just a travel log, although I'm doing that a lot right now because I am on a cross-country trip. I discuss everything from the writer's craft to mental health issues to whatever strikes my fancy. If you enjoyed this video, I do ask you to please hit that little like button. Feel free to share it if you think it's worthwhile. I look forward to seeing you in the future, and until we meet again, remember to always go and do great things.